This is Wrestling Forgotten Gems number 13. Just a series that I usually do once every week, which is where I talk about the most forgotten wrestling gems in wrestling history, whether it be a wrestler, feuds, or titles, or matches, or pay-per-views of that nature. Just a thing that I just do, and I just want to talk. I usually just talk about it and why these things shouldn't be forgotten. Today is for Wrestling Forgotten Gems number 13. This is going to be me talking about Vader, probably one of the most underrated big man wrestlers of all time. I mean, the guy could the guy could do more than what most big guys can do, and it was unheard of for the moves that he was doing. It was unheard of for a big guy his size to do some of the moves that he was doing back then. I mean, the guy did a moonsault off the top rope, which many wrestlers weren't doing, many big wrestlers weren't doing. I mean, you had Diesel, who was really not doing any moves like that. You had Yokozuna, who was doing bonsai drops from the top rope and leg drops, but he could actually move as well, but not do the moves like how Vader would do. You had Bam Bam Bigelow, and you had other guys around that time who were really big guys just around that time who really weren't doing some of the moves that Vader was doing, but Vader just managed to set the bar on big guys doing moves like that. And now you see maybe once in a while you'll see a big guy do a move like that, but really you don't see enough big guys doing moves that Vader did. The guy had some remarkable feuds when he was in WCW and then in WWF. Mostly the feuds I remember him having was the feud he had with Sting, where he broke Sting's ribs. Well, it started in 1992 when they first had the first meeting between the two. Vader broke Sting's ribs, and the couple days before the Great American Bash matchup that they had, and then Sting sold it like a trooper, and then Sting went under the match thinking he can handle Vader in the condition that he was in, but Vader just managed to destroy him, and he had his way, and then in the end Vader just became your new world heavyweight champion. But that was a pretty good feud that the two had around 1992, 93, and then some part of 94. It was just an awesome feud. Led to good matches between the two, as these two always had good chemistry in the ring. It also got Vader noticed as one of the best big man workers of all time, even though there's other guys on that list, but really he never really gets mentioned. But it just had many promoters taking notice of him when he had that feud with Sting, as Sting was the top star in WCW around that time, and many people were looking at Sting in all his matches and then all of his opponents, and that's what got Vader noticed a little bit. I mean, people noticing and taking notice of Vader. He also had some matches in Japan where he was doing a lot of good things and doing a lot of good moves in Japan and having some good feuds in Japan, and he sort of made a name for himself. I believe he was using his real name, which is Leon White. He was using his real name in Japan and going by that. Maybe he might have went by Vader as well on a couple appearances in Japan, but really all I really know him using the name was his name when he was in Japan. But really he was impressive in Japan. He had some good matches in Japan. There was also he got hurt a couple times. I believe there was an incident where he hurt himself, where his eyelid or something came out or something like that, and he still managed to wrestle, which shows you how tough he was. And he was just an awesome worker in Japan, and also an awesome big man US worker as well. He also had a feud with Ric Flair, where Vader was trying to end Ric Flair's career and trying to retire Ric Flair and get Ric Flair out of the wrestling business. That was a pretty good feud. Well, it led to a really good matchup between the two, I believe, at Starrcade 1993, where many people didn't really think that Flair was going to beat Vader, as Vader was still being built as an unstoppable monster, but Flair managed to prove them wrong and beat Vader, which was an upset because many people really didn't think Flair was going to beat Vader, although some smart marks believed that Flair was going to go over Vader, but many people who at the time were really smart marks really didn't think that Ric Flair was going to beat Vader. and he managed to prove them wrong. And that was just an awesome feud. And I believe that was one or two meetings between the two. There might have been like 3 or 4, but that's the only one or two that I can remember between the two. And then he also had a feud with Dustin Rhodes, which was a pretty good feud. He had a feud with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, which was a pretty bad feud, and it's such a sickening thing to watch him having a feud with Hacksaw Jim Duggan over the U.S. title, a guy who he was a better worker than, but still he managed to have a feud with him, and they really didn't have a really good matchup. I believe at Starrcade 1994, 94, 95, they didn't really have a good matchup, mainly to the fact that Vader was pretty much on his way out, and then he just didn't really care, so he didn't put much effort into it. He also had some notable feuds against Hulk Hogan, a feud that should have turned out well, but it really didn't turn out well, as Hogan just completely owned Vader, and in some of the matches he made Vader look like a jobber, and he didn't sell Vader's powerbomb, which made Vader look like a joke around that time. And really, it was such a sad thing to watch, as Vader was just still built as a monster even when Hulk Hogan came into WCW. But somehow Hogan got his hands on Vader, and he managed to turn Vader from a unstoppable monster into just a joke of himself, a joke or a jobber. And that's pretty much what Hogan did to Vader. But still, it was an okay feud for what it was. It led to 1 or 2 good matches between the two. But still, Vader should have been elevated in that feud, and he should have looked strong and dominant in that feud. But in the end, he didn't, and Hulk Hogan managed to somehow look better than him in that feud and got the upper hand against Vader in that feud. And he also had some other notable feuds in WWF, I believe. He had a feud against Shawn Michaels, where he was trying to get the belt from Shawn Michaels, and it led to a matchup between the two at SummerSlam 1996, where Vader was supposed to win the title from Shawn Michaels, but Shawn Michaels threw a hissy fit because, let's face it, around the era of 1996, the Clique was running rampant over the WWF, and they were getting their way. So Shawn Michaels used his political power around that time, when he was what he was back then, and managed to overturn the decision, and thus Vader didn't get the title that he was supposed to get. And it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if Vader was going to get the title, and would have been interesting to see what kind of a title reign he was going to get, even though he was scheduled to probably lose it back to Shawn Michaels or probably back to Sid. But still, it would have been a good thing to see, but just never happened, mainly because of politics. Also had a feud with Sid, which really wasn't a good feud, and it made him look like a joke, as just Sid just dominated him. He also feuded with, I believe, Vader, Yokozuna, in a really awful feud. It should have been better than what it was, but it was just a terrible feud. He also feuded with, I believe, Bret the Hitman Hart. He feuded with Shawn Michaels a little bit again, and then he feuded with Mark Henry, and then he feuded with Bradshaw. Then he feuded with Kane, which was probably one of his best feuds, as it kind of elevated him a little bit, but it really kind of degraded him a little bit, as he didn't look as strong as he should have looked. And really, overall, those last couple of feuds he had in the WWF just sort of killed his character, to the point where really people just didn't really care about him. But still, Vader was just an awesome worker, can put on good matches. He had a lot of notable good matches in WCW, had a lot of notable good matches in the WWF. Very hard worker, willing to put some guys over. He did have a bad attitude in WCW, which ultimately led to him getting fired. And then I believe he had a sort of attitude in the WWF, which led to him getting fired. But still, if you get over that, the man was just a very hard worker. He always brought his working boots on. He always did his best to put on a good matchup in front of the crowd. He sold well. He sold his gimmick well. Played his gimmick to Pearl, and he was just an overall complete package. Man, he was what a big guy nowadays is. What he's supposed to be built as, and there's not too many big guys nowadays in the WWE, TNA, or the independent scenes that's built as Vader, and that's one of the reasons why he's forgotten. that's one of the reasons why I feel Vader shouldn't be forgotten, as he was just a very good big man.